This constitutes a clear manifestation of Islamophobia, she articulated, her voice fracturing upon the final syllable as tears began to freely course down her countenance. This is nothing less than racism masquerading as bureaucratic oversight, and the American public possesses the clarity to perceive the truth of it. The hearing chamber seemed to collectively suspend its respiration. Representative Ilhan Omar stood positioned at the witness table within the Rayburn House office building, room number 2154, having endured 7 arduous hours of testimony. Finally, her stoic composure disintegrated. She did not merely perform the emotion. She wept in earnest. She recounted the harrowing history of the refugee encampment, the ravages of war, the 12-year-old girl who possessed no command of the English language, the lethal threats, and the individual who had rushed her with a syringe only the prior week. For 30 seconds, she commanded the absolute sympathy of the room. For 30 seconds, she appeared sympathetic, even to those individuals who fundamentally disagreed with every tenet she believed. Then she uttered the word Islamophobia. Immediately, the atmosphere in the room transformed, shifting perceptibly because everyone present had been observing the proceedings for 7 hours. Throughout that entire duration, Speaker Mike Johnson had not uttered the word Islam a single time. Johnson waited with practiced patience. He waited until she resumed her seat. He waited until her legal counsel placed a comforting hand upon her arm. He waited until the gallery quieted and the murmuring ceased, and until the C-SPAN cameras located his visage. Then he began to speak, and his vocal timbre maintained the same flat, clinical resonance it had held all day, the voice of an auditor reviewing a column of figures that failed to balance. Congresswoman, I have not made reference to your religion once this day. Not a single instance. Please review the transcript. I have not referenced your race. I have not referenced your hijab, your immigration status, or your background. He retrieved 2 sheets of paper from the table, elevating them so the cameras could clearly capture the 2 congressional financial disclosure forms, the most mundane documents in Washington, the variety that arguably nobody ever reads. I have spoken solely regarding these, your documents, your figures, your signature. He placed them side by side for comparison. This specific document states that your household net worth was $158,000. This subsequent document indicates it is worth up to $30 million. You earn $174,000 annually. And in 7 hours, you have not explained a single dollar of the difference. He directed his gaze toward her, and subsequently toward the gallery, specifically at the Somali-American women who had journeyed from Minneapolis, Muslim women from her own district, her own constituents. Are they Islamophobic? Are they racist? They desire to comprehend the exact same matter that I wish to know. He paused for effect. From where did these funds originate? Silence ensued. It was the variety of silence that carries weight, the kind that cameras adore and politicians dread. Omar's mouth opened, then closed. Her lawyer whispered something to her. She shook her head. There was no answer. It was this silence that would lead every news broadcast. Not the tears, not the refugee narrative, not the accusations of persecution, but the silence of a woman who could not explain her own bank account. To fully comprehend how matters arrived at this juncture, how a congresswoman who had weathered the Trump administration survived death threats, survived being stripped from committees, and survived being labeled a terrorist on cable news every night for 6 years, ended up undone by a document she had autographed herself. One must return to the beginning. You must return. It was 8 hours prior to the moment when Ilhan Omar walked into the Capitol, believing she understood what was approaching, when she had absolutely no concept that Mike Johnson was not intending to attack her identity. He intended to read her receipts, It was shortly past 8 in the morning when she sat within her Longworth building office reviewing talking points with her team. David Brennan, her attorney, a veteran of K Street, who charged $800 an hour and had shepherded half a dozen members of Congress through ethics complaints, sat opposite her with a legal pad filled with anticipated questions, rehearsed answers. "Standard playbook," Brennan stated. "They will inquire about feeding our future. You had absolutely nothing to do with it. They will inquire about campaign finance. The FEC dismissed that complaint in 2021 with a unanimous decision. They will ask about your financial disclosures. Everything was filed properly. If they push on Tim's businesses, we defer to your husband's right to conduct private business without congressional interference." Omar nodded, scrolling through her phone. Her mentions were already flooding. Progressive allies were posting support. Squad members were tweeting solidarity. The hashtag Defend Ilhan was climbing the trends. The machine was functioning. It always functioned. Every attack launched against her transformed into a fundraising cycle, a media tour, a chapter in the saga of a refugee who refused to be broken. "They have been investigating me for months," she said. "If they possessed anything substantial, we would be aware of it by now." "This is merely red meat for the MAGA base," Brennan replied. "It is the same tactic they always employ. The same thing Trump does every time his polling numbers drop. Attack the Muslim woman from Minnesota." She placed her phone down and looked at Brennan. "Honestly, this might be beneficial for us. The primaries are approaching. Every time Republicans drag me into a hearing, my small-dollar donations spike. Let them waste their time." Brennan did not share her optimism entirely. Lawyers are paid to worry, but he perceived no legal exposure. The FEC complaint had been dismissed. Her disclosures were filed. The fraud cases in the district were ugly, but she was not named in any of them. As far as he could determine, this hearing was a political exercise, and political exercises were Omar's home turf. Her chief of staff, Ela Bashir, had the media strategy mapped out. The second they go after you on anything Somalia-related, we pivot to the refugee story. If they bring up the fraud cases, we point out you were never charged, never implicated, never named in any indictment. If they hit your finances, Tim's businesses are his businesses. You have student loans. You have been transparent. "I have been transparent," Omar said, and she believed it because she had told herself the same thing so many times it had calcified into conviction. The FEC had dismissed the complaint. The financial disclosures were filed. The fact that Tim Mynette's company had gone from being worth $1 to being worth $25 million in a single year was simply good business. The fact that she had refused to disclose his exact ownership stakes was her right. However, what she did not know, and could not have known, was that 3 blocks away in the Speaker's office in the Capitol, Mike Johnson was orchestrating something she had not foreseen. Not an attack on her identity, not a conspiracy theory about Somalia, not even a criminal accusation, but something far simpler and more devastating. He intended to read her own paperwork back to her. Johnson sat at his desk with Tom Emerson, his chief counsel, a former assistant U.S. attorney who had spent 12 years prosecuting public corruption in the Eastern District of Virginia. Emerson had a reputation for being meticulous and humorless, which made him excellent at his profession. "Walk me through the sequencing one more time," Johnson requested. Emerson flipped through his outline. Phase 1. The district. We establish what transpired. Feeding our future. 250 million stolen. 78 indicted. 56 convicted, almost all within her district. We make it tangible. We read names, sentences. We display the map. We establish that this did not occur in some abstract location. It happened in the 5th Congressional District of Minnesota. which she represents. Phase 2. Proximity. Safari Land. The fundraisers, the staffer who was convicted, we show she was not merely a bystander. She was in the room. She knew these people. Phase 3. The money. Her financial disclosures, the jump from 158,000 to potentially 30 million. Tim Minet's businesses, the E Street Group payments, the winery fraud allegations, the cannabis deal collapse, the OFAC freeze. We do not accuse her of stealing. We simply ask where the money came from and watch her fail to answer. Phase 4. Her own words. We play the clips, the Benjamin's tweet, the Somali speech, the defense of fraud investigators being racist. We let her contradict herself in her own voice. Phase 5. The shield. We demonstrate the pattern. Every time someone investigated fraud in her district, someone cried racism, and she amplified it. She gave it legitimacy. She made it harder for law enforcement to protect her own constituents. Johnson nodded. Tone? Clinical, Emerson said. Prosecutorial. No emotion, no name-calling, no culture war. We never mention her religion. We never mention her race. We never mention immigration. We talk about money, documents, votes, and her own recorded statements. If she brings up identity, that is her problem. We talk about receipts. Johnson felt the weight of what he was about to do. He was not attempting to destroy someone. He was attempting to hold someone accountable. There was a difference. At least, he believed there was. Let's go, he said. At 9:45, both sides converged on the hearing room. Omar entered through the main corridor, surrounded by supporters. Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib walked beside her. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. She stopped for a brief statement. This hearing is a political hit job designed to silence a black Muslim woman who speaks truth to power. I will not be silenced. I will not be intimidated. And I will continue fighting for my constituents and for justice. The statement was polished, practiced. It would make the evening news. She looked exactly the way she wanted to look. Strong, defiant, unbowed. Johnson came in through a side entrance carrying his binder, avoiding cameras, looking like an accountant heading to an audit. The hearing room filled, every seat taken, the press gallery packed. The gallery was a split screen of America. Omar supporters in Purple We Stand, with Ilhan shirts on one side, and on the other, a small group of Somali American women who had driven from Minneapolis. They were not wearing political shirts. They were wearing the faces of people who had something to say and had waited a long time to say it. At 10 sharp, Johnson gavelled the hearing to order. The Committee on Oversight and Accountability will come to order. We are here today to examine questions of fraud, accountability, and constituent representation in federal assistance programs, with a specific focus on events in Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. His voice was dry, procedural, deliberately boring. This was not theater. This was paperwork. Congresswoman Omar, you are here pursuant to subpoena. You have the right to counsel. You have the right to make an opening statement. Do you understand these rights? I do. Would you like to make an opening statement? She stood, looked at the cameras, drew a breath. Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And she gave the speech, the one she had rehearsed. The refugee story, the camp in Kenya, coming to America with nothing, learning English, working hard, becoming a citizen, being elected. All of it true, all of it moving, all of it irrelevant to what was about to happen. Everything I have done has been in service of my constituents, she said. I have spent my career fighting for refugees, for immigrants, for working families. I did not commit fraud. I was not charged with fraud. I was not named in any indictment. This hearing is a political exercise designed to punish me for being who I am and saying what I believe." Her supporters applauded. Johnson let it run for a few seconds, then gavelled them quiet. "Thank you, Congresswoman. That was a moving statement. Now, let's look at the record." He opened the binder to the red tab. "Let's start with what happened in your district." Johnson pulled up a map on the screen behind him. Minnesota's 5th congressional district, which covers Minneapolis and surrounding areas. On the map, red dots marked the locations of Feeding Our Future meal distribution sites that were later identified as fraudulent. There were dozens of them, nearly all clustered in Omar's district. The map looked like it had a rash. "The Feeding Our Future scandal," Johnson began, "is the largest pandemic-era fraud in American history. A nonprofit called Feeding Our Future claimed to distribute meals to children through the federal child nutrition program. During COVID, when schools were closed, the program expanded dramatically. Feeding Our Future went from handling $3 to $4 million annually to claiming reimbursements for 91 million meals. He let that number land, 91 million meals, except most of those meals were never served. The sites were fake. The attendance rosters were filled with invented names. The invoices were forged, and the money, $250 million of federal funds meant to feed hungry children, was stolen. He read from the Department of Justice press release. Stolen and used to buy luxury cars, vacation properties, jewelry, commercial real estate in Minnesota, Kenya, and Turkey. Some of the money was wired overseas to accounts in Mogadishu. 78 people have been indicted, more than 56 convicted. The ringleader, a woman named Amy Bach, was found guilty on all counts this year. Most of the other defendants are members of the Somali American community, your constituents, Congresswoman, people who live in your district, people who voted for you. He began reading names slowly, one at a time. Mahad Ibrahim, 12 years in federal prison, ordered to pay $47 million in restitution. Abdiaziz Farah, 9 years. Abdimajid Noor, 6 years. He went through a dozen names, each one a constituent, each one a federal conviction, each one a story of money stolen from programs designed to feed children. The room was silent, except for his voice and the scratch of reporters' pens. In the gallery, a woman pressed her hand to her mouth. She recognized some of the names. She lived on the same block as one of them. He had driven a 10-year-old Toyota until the fraud money came in. Then, it was a BMW. Everyone on the block noticed. Nobody said anything. "Now, Congresswoman, when did you first become aware that there were problems with this program?" Omar shifted in her seat. Her lawyer leaned forward. Congresswoman Omar was never involved in the Feeding Our Future organization and had no role in. "I didn't ask about her role," Johnson interrupted gently. "I asked when she became aware. The Minnesota Department of Education flagged irregularities as early as 2020. Their inspectors visited sites that claimed to serve thousands of meals a day and found empty rooms. No children, no food, no evidence that a single meal had been served. The department tried to slow reimbursements pending review. And what happened?" He answered his own question. Feeding Our Future sued the state, claimed the investigation was racially motivated because many of their operators were Somali American. A Ramsey County judge, Judge John Guthman, actually held the Minnesota Department of Education in contempt of court and ordered them to keep paying while the lawsuit was pending. The investigation was crippled for months. Millions more dollars disappeared during that delay. Did your office support Feeding Our Future's position? Did you or your staff communicate with anyone involved in the lawsuit? Did you make any public statements supporting the claim that the state's oversight was racially motivated? Omar started carefully. I have always stood against racial profiling in all its forms. I'm not asking about racial profiling in the abstract. I'm asking about this specific case. A $250 million fraud. An investigation that was delayed because someone cried racism. Did you support that narrative? He clicked to a video. Omar at a press conference, not from the Feeding Our Future case specifically, but from early 2026, speaking about the broader federal fraud investigation in Minnesota. Her voice filled the hearing room. There is no reason for them to use this level of rhetoric. There is no reason for them to fully stop these programs. The only reason they are doing that is for PR purposes. Johnson stopped the clip. $250 million stolen. 78 people indicted. 56 convicted. And you called the investigation PR purposes. Were the convictions for PR, Congresswoman? No answer. Just a glare. Johnson shifted to the blue tab. His voice stayed level, almost conversational, like a man reading from a spreadsheet, which, in a way, he was. Let me ask about Safari Restaurant. Omar's jaw tightened slightly. Barely perceptible, but the cameras caught it. Safari Restaurant in Minneapolis, co-owned by Salim Saeed, who has since been convicted of wire fraud in connection with the Feeding Our Future scheme. According to trial evidence, Safari Restaurant was one of the original fraudulent meal sites. It is a restaurant with approximately 40 seats. It claimed to be serving thousands of meals per day to children. He pulled up a photograph. Omar at a community event. The location, Safari Restaurant. The photo was from a local Minneapolis news outlet covering a campaign season community gathering. You held events at this location. Multiple events. You knew the owners. Your opponent in the 2024 primary, Don Samuels, stated publicly that Safari Restaurant was a political hub in the Somali community and that, to quote him, "If you're going to be in politics, you need to go through the people at the Safari Restaurant. They kind of control the politics." A former member of your own staff was also convicted in the Feeding Our Future case. Omar shifted. Mr. Speaker, attending community events is literally my job. I attend events at churches, mosques, restaurants, community centers. I understand that. And I wouldn't bring up a restaurant visit if it were just a restaurant, but this restaurant was claiming federal reimbursements for thousands of meals per day. Its co-owner is now in federal prison, and you were there regularly enough that political operatives in your district considered it essential to your political network. Omar's lawyer interjected. Mr. Speaker, attending a community event at a restaurant does not imply I agree. Johnson said, attending an event doesn't imply anything on its own, but I'm establishing proximity. Because the question the American people are asking isn't whether you personally filled out fake meal count forms. The question is whether the largest fraud in American history happened all around you, in your district, among your supporters, at locations you frequented, involving people on your staff, and you somehow noticed nothing. You, who pride yourself on being the most connected, most attentive, most community-engaged representative in Congress. He leaned forward slightly. A restaurant with 40 seats, claiming to serve thousands of meals a day to children. Operators driving new BMWs and buying investment properties in Nairobi while running supposed children's nutrition programs out of storefronts with no kitchen equipment. Did none of this seem unusual to you? I don't audit restaurants. No, but you defended the people who were supposed to be auditing them. When investigators tried to look into it, you called it political persecution. When federal agents were sent to Minneapolis, you called it confusion and chaos. When convictions started coming in, you characterized the entire effort as an attack on the Somali community. He paused. Who were you protecting, Congresswoman? Your constituents? Or the people who were stealing from them? The room stirred. A murmur from the gallery. One of the Somali American women from Minneapolis wiped her eyes. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. Johnson opened the green tab. This was the section that mattered most, and everyone in the room could feel the shift. The district questions were context. The safari restaurant questions were proximity. But the money was the critical point. Let's talk about your personal finances. He held up the two disclosure forms again, side by side for the cameras. 2022, your household net worth was listed as between $50,000 and $158,000. That's modest. That's relatable. That's what most Americans would expect from a member of Congress who talks constantly about student loan debt and economic justice. 2024. Your household assets are listed as potentially worth between $6 million and $30 million. Your husband's stake in a winery is valued at $1 to $5 million. His stake in a venture capital firm called Rose Lake Capital is valued at $5 to $25 million. That's a change of, let me do the math, somewhere between 4,000% and 20,000% in 2 years. He set the papers down. Now, I understand that asset values can grow. I understand that investments can appreciate, but let me walk through the timeline of your husband's business career. Because the committee has done significant research, and the American people deserve to see it. Tim Minette, your husband since 2020. Previously, a political consultant who ran a firm called E Street Group. Your campaign paid E Street Group approximately $3 million between 2018 and 2020 for consulting, advertising, travel expenses, and production costs. At one point, your campaign constituted 66% of his firm's total federal revenue. After the payments drew public criticism, you severed the campaign's relationship with E Street Group. Your husband then pivoted to new ventures. Venture number 1, a California winery operated with his business partner, Will Haler. An investor has sued them, claiming they promised to triple his $300,000 investment and instead made the money disappear. The lawsuit seeks $780,000. Venture number 2, a cannabis business in South Dakota. 3 marijuana entrepreneurs say they're owed $1.2 million from a failed deal with Minette and Haler's company. Venture number 3, Rose Lake Capital, a venture capital firm. In your 2023 disclosure, you listed its value as somewhere between $1 and $1,000. 1 year later, it was worth between $5 million and $25 million. Johnson looked up. Let those numbers breathe. A company worth $1 becomes worth $25 million in 12 months. At the same time, the largest fraud investigation in Minnesota history is unfolding in your district. Your husband's previous firm was funded almost entirely by your campaign. His subsequent ventures have been accused of defrauding investors, and you have refused to disclose his exact ownership percentages in any of these companies, which breaks standard congressional disclosure norms. Omar's lawyer stood. Mr. Speaker, the Congresswoman's financial disclosures comply with all legal requirements. The values listed represent the total estimated value of the businesses, not necessarily her husband's individual share. Then what is his individual share? Johnson asked simply. Silence. If the listed values represent the whole business and not his share, then what is his actual share? 50%? 10%? 1%? Your disclosures don't say. Congressional norms call for that information. You chose not to provide it. Why? Omar spoke. Her voice was tight. My husband is entitled to conduct business privately. You file joint tax returns. His income is your income. His assets affect your financial interests, and you serve on committees that vote on legislation affecting investment and business. The American people have a right to know whether you have financial conflicts. That's not persecution. That's the law. He pulled out one more document. I also want to note that one of your husband's companies had funds frozen by the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control OFAC. This is the agency that oversees sanctions enforcement, terrorist financing, and money laundering. Can you explain why OFAC was involved with your husband's company? Omar's lawyer whispered urgently. She shook her head. We're not going to discuss pending legal matters. So there is a pending legal matter involving OFAC and your husband's company? More silence. The lawyer's face said everything. Johnson sat back. Let me summarize. Your campaign paid your husband $3 million. His businesses have been accused of fraud by multiple investors. One of his companies had funds frozen by the anti-money laundering arm of the U.S. Treasury. Your household went from being worth less than a used car to being worth potentially $30 million in 24 months, and you can't or won't explain any of it. He picked up the two disclosure forms one more time. Either these forms are inaccurate, in which case you signed false statements under penalty of perjury, or they're accurate, in which case you owe the American people an explanation for a level of wealth accumulation that would make a hedge fund manager blush. Which is it, Congresswoman? Johnson opened the yellow tab. He didn't reach for documents this time. He reached for his tablet. This was the section built on Omar's own voice. Her own words played back in sequence to reveal a pattern she had never been forced to confront. Congresswoman, I want to play a few clips. All public record. All your own statements. He pressed play. First clip. February 2019. The tweet heard around the world. Read aloud because tweets don't have audio. It's all about the Benjamins, baby. Omar's response to a question about why members of Congress support Israel. The bipartisan condemnation that followed. Her own party's leadership calling it out. Her apology. Johnson read the apology. Anti-Semitism is real, and I am grateful for Jewish allies and colleagues who are educating me on the painful history of anti-Semitic tropes. This is why I unequivocally apologize. He looked up. You apologized for suggesting that money buys political loyalty. You said it was an anti-Semitic trope to imply that financial interests drive congressional behavior. Do you stand by that apology? Omar hesitated. This was a trap, and she could feel it, but she couldn't see where it closed. Her lawyer started to lean in, but she waved him off. She would handle this one herself. I do. I apologized and I meant it. Good. I respect that. So the idea that money creates improper political influence is, in your view, a serious accusation. One that shouldn't be thrown around lightly. It should be made with evidence, not with stereotypes. Agreed. So let me present some evidence. Johnson's voice didn't change. Still flat, still conversational, still deadly. Your campaign paid your husband's consulting firm $3 million. After you married him, his companies suddenly became worth millions more. You sit on committees that affect the industries his companies operate in. He has a stake in a venture capital firm that invests in businesses that may be affected by legislation you vote on. He paused just long enough. By your own standard, the standard you set in your apology, wouldn't it be fair for someone to ask whether money has influenced your behavior? Whether the $3 million your campaign paid, your husband created any kind of improper loyalty? The room went quiet. Omar stared at him. That's completely different. Why? Because it's you? Because when someone else's financial relationships create an appearance of corruption, it's a legitimate concern. But when it's yours, it's persecution? He didn't wait for an answer. He moved to the second clip. January 27th, 2024. The Somali speech. Johnson played the actual video. Omar, speaking in Somali to a room of constituents at a Minneapolis hotel, he showed the viral translation that had spread on social media, the one that claimed she said her top priority was to put Somalia first. Then he showed the independent translation from PolitiFact and the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, which said the viral version was distorted. "I want to be fair," Johnson said. The viral translation was inaccurate. Independent translators confirmed that you were speaking about the Ethiopia-Somaliland dispute over sea access and encouraging civic engagement. "I'm not going to use a bad translation against you. That would be dishonest." Omar visibly relaxed for 1 second, the briefest flicker of relief. But that single word pulled the tension back like a bowstring. However, you retweeted a translation of your own speech that read, quote, "While I am in Congress, no one will take Somalia's sea." You retweeted that yourself, from your own verified account, not a hostile translation by your enemies. Your own account sharing what you considered an accurate summary of your own words. He showed the retweet on the screen. Omar's handle, the quote, the date. "Is that an accurate reflection of what you said to that room?" "I was advocating for my constituents' concerns about a foreign policy matter. You were pledging your congressional office to a foreign country's territorial dispute. You didn't say, 'I'll advocate for a diplomatic resolution.' You didn't say, 'I'll raise this issue through appropriate channels.' You said, 'No one will take Somalia's sea while I am in Congress.' You made your seat in the United States Congress into an instrument of Somali foreign policy, and you were proud enough of that statement to share it yourself. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, your own state's Republican whip, called those remarks appalling and demanded an ethics investigation. Governor Ron DeSantis called for your expulsion and deportation. Those were overreactions. I'm not calling for your deportation. I'm asking a simple question. When you told a room full of Somali Americans that while you are in Congress, no one will take Somalia's sea, were you speaking as an American congresswoman or as a representative of Somalia?" He played the third clip. January 2026. Omar on Face the Nation, talking about the federal fraud investigation in Minnesota. Her voice again, unmistakable. There is no reason for them to use this level of rhetoric. There is no reason for them to fully stop these funding these programs. The only reason they are doing that is for PR purposes. Johnson stopped the recording. The room was very still. $250 million stolen. 78 indictments. 56 convictions. Children in your district went hungry because the meals they were supposed to receive were never served. The money was spent on luxury cars and real estate in Kenya and Turkey. Some of it was wired to Mogadishu. And you called the investigation PR. He leaned forward. Were the 56 convictions for PR? Were the 12-year prison sentences for PR? Were the children who didn't get fed just props in a Republican PR campaign? Omar started to respond, but Johnson wasn't finished. "Let me tell you who your community actually needed you to protect." He nodded toward the gallery. "Those women right there. They drove from Minneapolis. Somali American mothers whose children were enrolled in these programs, children who were supposed to get meals and didn't. One of them reported it to your office. Your office never responded." A gasp from the gallery. Then quiet. One of the women in the gallery nodded. She wasn't performing. She was confirming. Omar looked at the gallery. For the first time in the hearing, something flickered across her face that wasn't defiance. It looked like recognition, like she was seeing for the first time that the people she claimed to represent were sitting in the room and they were not on her side. "Who were you protecting, Congresswoman?" Johnson's voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "When you called the investigators racist, when you called the federal presence unnecessary, when you said it was all for PR, were you protecting your constituents? Or were you protecting the ecosystem that was making your household very, very rich?" He pulled up one final timeline on the screen. Simple, chronological, devastating in its clarity. 2020. State investigators flag irregularities in Feeding Our Future. The organization accuses the state of racism. The investigation slows. A judge holds the state in contempt and orders them to keep paying. 2020 to 2022. Fraud continues unchecked. Another $100 million disappears. Money flows overseas. Children go unfed. 2022. FBI raids. Indictments begin. You characterize the scrutiny as political attacks on the Somali community. 2023. Convictions start. Your household net worth begins its dramatic climb. 2024. Your financial disclosures show assets worth potentially $30 million. You refuse to explain the wealth. 2025 to 2026. More convictions. Federal investigators estimate total fraud across multiple Minnesota programs may reach into the billions. You go on national television and call the investigation confusion and chaos. You say it's for PR. He pointed at the timeline. Every step of the way, when someone tried to stop the bleeding, the race card was played. By the fraudsters, by their lawyers, by the organizations, and by you. You gave it legitimacy. You gave it a congressional seal of approval. You made it politically dangerous for any investigator, state or federal, to ask hard questions about fraud in your district, because they knew that if they did, a sitting member of Congress would accuse them of racism on national television. And the ringleader of the entire scheme, the woman at the center of all of it, was Amy Bach, a white woman. Prosecutors described her as using fake claims of racism to silence oversight. A cooperating witness called her God because of how much power she held over the network. She weaponized identity to protect corruption. And you, Congresswoman, whether you knew it or not, helped her do it. He paused. Let the room absorb it. Do you understand what that did? Not to the investigators. They did their jobs anyway, eventually, but to your constituents, to the Somali American families who reported fraud and were ignored, to the mothers who told their children's schools that the meals weren't coming and nobody listened. They couldn't get help because the system was afraid of being called racist, afraid of the narrative you helped build. This was the part where it was supposed to fall apart for Johnson. This was the part where Omar was supposed to rise, give the speech, summon the full force of her story, the refugee camp, the journey, the American dream, and turn the hearing into a rallying cry. She stood. Her voice shook, but not with weakness, with anger. I came to this country with nothing, she said. I fled war. I lived in a camp for 4 years. I came to America as a 12-year-old girl who didn't speak English. I worked, I studied, I became a citizen. I was elected to represent my community. And every single day since I took office, I have been attacked for being Muslim, for being black, for being born in Africa, for wearing a hijab, for daring to exist in this space. The gallery was riveted. Even Johnson listened. I have had death threats. I have been called a terrorist. A man charged at me with a syringe just last week. The President of the United States suggested I staged my own assault. And now, you sit here in this committee room and you use my community's pain as a weapon against me. You use the fraud that hurt my people as a tool to destroy me. Her voice cracked. I didn't steal anything. I didn't commit any fraud. Every investigation into me has found nothing. The FEC dismissed the complaint unanimously. And still, you drag me here. Still, you parade my family's finances. Still, you question my loyalty. Because that's what you do to people who look like me. She was crying now. Not performing, actually crying. And for 30 seconds, the room felt it. The weight of her story. The reality of the threats, the ugliness of what immigrants in public life face. 30 seconds. where she was genuinely sympathetic. Then she made the mistake, the one we saw at the beginning of this story. "This is Islamophobia," she said, wiping her eyes. "This is racism disguised as oversight, and the American people see right through it. And now you know what happened next. You heard it at the top." Johnson waited. Let her sit down. Let the room settle. And then he picked up those 2 sheets of paper, the same 2 pieces of paper he'd been holding all day, the most boring documents in Washington, and he said the words that would end up on every screen in America by midnight. "Congresswoman, I have not mentioned your religion once today. Not once." But hearing it again in context, after 7 hours of testimony, after the money trail and the safari restaurant photos, and the Benjamin's trap, and the Somali speech played back to her, and the timeline of fraud she'd called PR, hearing it now, it landed differently, heavier, final. "I haven't mentioned your race. I haven't mentioned your hijab, your immigration status, or your background. I've talked about financial disclosures you signed, campaign payments you authorized, statements you made on camera, positions you took publicly." He held up the 2 disclosure forms. "These are your documents, your numbers, your signature. If being asked to explain a 20,000% increase in your net worth is Islamophobia, then what do you call it when your own constituents ask the same question?" He turned to the gallery. "The Somali American women, are they Islamophobic? Are they racist? They're Muslim. They're Somali. They're from your district. And they want to know the same thing I want to know. Where did the money come from?" Omar sat. She had nothing left. The refugee story, which was real and powerful and true, had been deployed in the wrong place, at the wrong time, aimed at the wrong accusation. Johnson hadn't questioned her loyalty or her faith. He'd questioned her bank account. And the refugee story doesn't answer a financial disclosure. Johnson straightened his papers. "Let me bring this together." He spoke directly to the camera now, to the American public. "Here's what we know. The largest welfare fraud in American history, $250 million, happened in Congresswoman Omar's district. Her core constituents were both the victims and, in many cases, the perpetrators. Federal and state investigators tried to look into it. Each time they did, they were accused of racism. Congresswoman Omar amplified that accusation. She called the investigations political persecution. She called them PR. While this was happening, her household wealth exploded. Her campaign had paid her husband $3 million. His subsequent businesses have been accused of defrauding investors. One had funds frozen by the Treasury Department's anti-money laundering agency. Their combined assets went from $158,000 to potentially $30 million in 24 months. She refuses to disclose her husband's exact ownership stakes. She refuses to explain the wealth. I am not accusing Congresswoman Omar of fraud. That's for the Department of Justice to determine. I am saying that the American people deserve answers, and today, in 7 hours of testimony, she has not provided a single one. He picked up a prepared statement. Based on the evidence presented, this committee makes the following referrals. First, to the Department of Justice for investigation of the accuracy of Congresswoman Omar's financial disclosures and potential conflicts of interest. Second, to the House Ethics Committee for failure to comply with disclosure norms regarding spousal business interests. Third, to the Internal Revenue Service for review of joint tax filings in light of the discrepancy between reported income and asset growth. Fourth, to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence for review of Congresswoman Omar's security clearance pending the outcome of these investigations. Each referral landed like a stamp on a document. Administrative, bureaucratic, devastating. Congresswoman Omar, Johnson said, "You are not being charged with anything today. but you are being asked to answer questions you have refused to answer, and the American people will draw their own conclusions from your refusal." He closed his binder. "This hearing is adjourned." He stood. The committee members stood. They filed out. No drama, no shouting, no theatrical pronouncements. They left the way accountants leave an audit. Quietly, having done the math, Omar sat at the witness table. Her lawyer was talking to her, but she didn't seem to hear him. The cameras were still rolling. Her supporters in the gallery were chanting something, but it sounded far away, like noise from another room. The Somali-American women from Minneapolis were already walking out. They didn't look at her. She'd come into the hearing as a symbol of immigrant resilience. She was leaving as a woman who couldn't explain her own bank account. The clips went viral within minutes. Not the emotional moments, not the refugee speech, not the accusations of Islamophobia. The clips that spread were boring, devastating, but boring. A side-by-side of two financial disclosure forms, $158,000, $30 million, on a $174,000 salary. That was the tweet. That was the TikTok. That was the headline on every news site by evening. The New York Times ran it straight. Omar hearing raises unanswered questions about wealth. The Washington Post, from $158,000 to $30 million. Omar's financial disclosures under scrutiny. Even outlets sympathetic to her couldn't avoid the math, because math doesn't have a political party. Progressive allies tried the usual defenses. AOC called it a witch hunt. Tlaib called it Islamophobia. But the problem was that Johnson hadn't mentioned Islam, hadn't mentioned race, hadn't mentioned Somalia, except in the context of a fraud scheme with 56 federal convictions. He'd talked about numbers on forms she'd signed herself. The defenses didn't stick because they were aimed at attacks that hadn't been made. The polls moved not dramatically. Americans don't change their minds about politicians overnight. But the question planted itself. Where did the money come from? And it was the kind of question that doesn't go away because there's no satisfying answer. If the money is legitimate, show the receipts. If the receipts are private, explain why. If you can't explain why, people will fill in the blanks themselves. In Minneapolis, the Somali-American community response was complicated. It wasn't the unified defense Omar had counted on. Some people rallied behind her. Others were quieter. A local imam gave a Friday sermon about accountability that didn't name Omar, but didn't need to. When someone claims to speak for us, he said, we have the right to ask, are they speaking for us or for themselves? The women who had gone to the hearing gave an interview to a local station. One of them, a nurse named Halima, said something that cut deeper than anything Johnson had said in the hearing room. I came to America as a refugee, just like her. I work 60 hours a week. I pay my taxes. I follow the law. And when people in our community stole money that was supposed to feed our children, she called the investigators racist. She didn't protect us. She protected them. And now she's worth $30 million, and I'm still paying off my daughter's school lunch debt. Another woman, Sahara, a small business owner who ran a halal grocery, added, we are not a shield. Our identity is not a defense attorney. When someone steals from our children and then hides behind our pain, that is not representation. That is exploitation. It wasn't anger in their voices. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of immigrants who played by the rules, watching someone who, at minimum, looked away, while others broke them, and then called every question about it bigotry. They hadn't come to Washington to destroy Ilhan Omar. They'd come because they'd been waiting for someone to ask the questions their congresswoman wouldn't answer, and they were tired of waiting. The House Ethics Committee opened a formal inquiry within a week, not into fraud that was the DOJ's territory, but into the financial disclosures. The specific questions were narrow and bureaucratic. Did the disclosures accurately reflect the value of the assets? Why were spousal ownership stakes not specified? Were there unreported conflicts of interest? Boring questions, the kind that end careers not with a bang, but with an audit. Omar held a press conference the next day. She called it political persecution. She called it Trump's vendetta. She invoked her refugee story again. She did everything she'd always done, the script that had always worked. But something had shifted. The question wasn't about her identity anymore. It wasn't about Islam or refugees or Somalia. It was about a number on a form, a number she'd signed, a number that didn't add up. She kept talking. The cameras recorded her. But the question just sat there, patient and immovable, like Mike Johnson sitting at the head of that committee table with his color-coded binder, waiting for an answer she would never give. 158,000 to 30 million on a government salary in a district where 250 million vanished from programs meant to feed children. While the Congresswoman called every investigator racist and every investigation a witch hunt, the math didn't add up. And in Washington, when the math doesn't add up, the story writes itself. She never explained the money. She never disclosed her husband's ownership stakes. She never answered the question about why she called the largest fraud investigation in American history PR. She never addressed why her office didn't respond to the constituent who reported that her children's meals never arrived. She never explained how a company worth $1 became worth 25 million in 12 months. She just kept saying the word Islamophobia into cameras that had stopped believing it. Not because Islamophobia isn't real, it is, and she had genuinely suffered from it, but because you can't use a real wound to cover a fake alibi. Eventually, people stopped looking at the wound and started looking at the numbers. And the numbers were right there on the forms she signed herself under penalty of perjury, in black and white. Where did the money come from? She never said. And in Washington, what you don't say is louder than anything you do.